So I'm Ed, I'm 37, I live in Brighton with my cat, who I'm very fond of. And growing up, without knowing at the time that I was transgender, had a big impact on my mental health. I didn't have the language to explain how I was feeling or to talk about my identity. I didn't know that my gender was a problem for me. It didn't occur to me that that could be a problem because I wasn't seeing other people talking about it around me in books, in magazines, in newspapers, on television. It didn't exist in my world, and so I couldn't find a way to talk about the problems that I felt inside, why I felt so uncomfortable in my own skin, and that led to a lot of problems in my mental health. Having that buried inside me, I was very anxious all the time as a child. I got very depressed as a teenager. It came out in lots of different ways. I had an eating disorder. I had lots of compulsive behaviour. I went through long periods of depression and then lots of problems with my mood. So it was very confusing for me to understand why all this was going on and why I was having all these problems and why I wasn't coping well, because I couldn't find the solution, the thing that needed to make it all okay. And then as an adult, when I was in my 20s, I did eventually, with a lot of searching, I found a website that talked about female to male trans people, and I realised that was what was going on for me. That was the words that I needed to explain how I felt, and so I began transitioning to male in, I don't know, I was 24, and from that point, my mental health did start to get lots better. It did relieve a lot of my anxiety. I did start to feel like I was finally being seen, and in the past I felt invisible, like I couldn't be seen. And then as my body started to change and I started to look the way I felt calmer, I felt more comfortable around people, I felt less stressed about my own body and about myself. But at the same time, transitioning is not a quick fix. It doesn't solve all your problems, and it certainly doesn't make them go away overnight, because it's a very, very long process and it's a very hard process. And so throughout that time when I was transitioning was a time when I really, really needed really good mental health care to help me deal with how I was feeling about transitioning, to help me deal with the anxiety of having to come out to my family, to come out to my partner, to come out to my work. And there was at the time a lack of support that both recognised my trans identity and to recognise the problems that I had as I transitioned, but also to recognise my mental health problems. I found that I could go to a mental health support group and talk about my eating disorder, talk about stress and anxiety, but if I came out as trans, they didn't know how to handle it. And I would go to trans peer support groups and I could talk about the trouble with the gender clinics, the trouble with doctors, trouble with just dealing with the stigma of being trans in today's society, but talk about your mental health problems there, and it wasn't handled very well always. And I needed somewhere where I could be open about being trans and open about my mental health and be with people who recognised that one has an impact on the other, that being trans isn't a mental health condition, but it has an impact on your mental health when you live in a society that sees you as something different and strange and not normal. And I felt I was normal. I felt this was a totally normal thing to do, but not being recognised as being normal leads to a lot of stress and depression and anxiety and all these other problems. And so I really needed support that bridged those two identities and understood them and understood how they interacted. As I was transitioning, I found that some of the best help I got was from my peers, was from other trans people. Being in a space where being trans was normal and that you could talk about movies and TV and books and friends, but you didn't have to hide something. And hiding being trans has been probably one of the most painful parts of my life. When I do feel that is okay, when I feel safe to be out, that is when I feel calmest, and that is what I would want for all trans people eventually one day, is to just be able to be themselves and not have to hide anything.
Different kinds over the next decade, and I had hospital stays and